大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。你有没有试过每次听到手机通知声就下意识拿起来看，或者每次走进餐厅闻到香味就马上觉得饿？你以为那是你自己的选择吗？其实你正在重演一个100多年前的实验。那个实验的主角不是人，是一只狗，而改变世界的那个人是伊凡帕夫洛夫。帕夫洛夫是一位俄罗斯科学家，他得过诺贝尔奖，但他最让人津津乐道的发现，不是来自精密仪器，而是来自几只狗流出的口水。这个故事要从一个小镇说起。1849年9月14日，帕夫洛夫出生在俄罗斯梁赞。梁赞是个宁静的小城市，靠近莫斯科东南方。他的父亲是当地的东正教神父，家里并不富裕，但书多，思想开放。父亲鼓励孩子阅读和思考。帕夫洛夫从小就是个好奇心旺盛的孩子，他喜欢观察植物，喜欢研究昆虫，喜欢问为什么。年轻的帕夫洛夫本来是要走父亲的路的，进入神学院学习神学，准备成为一名神父。但是他读了一本书之后，一切都改变了。那本书是俄国思想家皮萨列夫写的文章集。皮萨列夫大力推崇自然科学，认为科学才能改变俄国的命运。帕夫洛夫读完之后整个人燃起来了，他决定放弃神学，转去研究科学。1870年，帕夫洛夫进入圣彼得堡大学，主修自然科学。在那里他遇到了改变他一生的导师，伊利亚齐昂是俄罗斯著名的生理学家。帕夫洛夫在他的指导下接受严格的科学训练，学会了精确的实验方法，学会了系统性的观察记录。这些训练让他终身受益。帕夫洛夫的学习生涯并不轻松，他家里贫穷，有好几年几乎是靠着微薄的奖学金度日，有时候饿着肚子去做实验，有时候连买书的钱都没有。但他从来没有放弃，他有一股执着，就是要把每一个实验做到最精确，把每一个数据搞清楚。1881年，帕夫洛夫与一位老师的女儿塞拉菲马卡尔切夫斯卡纳结婚，妻子是一位温柔有才华的女性，她非常支持丈夫的研究工作。两人后来育有4个孩子，家庭生活虽然简朴，却充满了温暖与爱。帕夫洛夫在早期最重要的研究是消化系统，他设计了一套创新的实验方法，让科学家们可以在动物活着的时候研究消化过程。以前的科学家只能解剖死去的动物来观察器官，根本无法看到消化过程的真实样子。帕夫洛夫设计了一种手术方法，在狗的胃部和肠道制作小的开口，再用导管把消化液引导出来收集，这样就可以在狗正常生活的状态下，研究它进食时消化液的分泌情况。这个方法听起来有点残忍，但在那个年代这是标准的科学研究方式。帕夫洛夫对实验动物的照顾是出了名的细心，他坚持让动物在手术后完全恢复健康，才继续实验。他说过，只有健康的动物才能给我们真实的数据。透过这些精密的消化研究，帕夫洛夫发现了胰液分泌的规律，找出了神经系统如何控制胃液分泌。这些发现让他在1904年获得了诺贝尔生理学奖，他是第一位获得诺贝尔奖的俄罗斯科学家。那一天圣彼得堡举国欢腾，帕夫洛夫成了民族英雄。但是让帕夫洛夫真正流传千古的发现，不是消化腺，而是一个意外。那是在消化研究进行的过程中，帕夫洛夫和他的团队注意到一件奇怪的事情，狗在看到食物之前就开始流口水了。当饲养员拿着装食物的碗走进实验室，狗还没有看到食物，就已经开始分泌唾液了，甚至只是听到饲养员走路的脚步声，狗就开始流口水了。这在科学上是一个谜。唾液分泌是一个生理反应，应该是在食物接触到嘴巴之后才发生的，怎么可能在食物出现之前就发生呢？帕夫洛夫没有忽视这个现象。很多科学家遇到预期外的结果，会觉得那是干扰，是噪音，把它过滤掉，继续做自己的研究。但帕夫洛夫不同， 他觉得这个意外发现比他原本研究的问题更有趣。他决定深入追究。他设计了一个现在每个学生都知道的实验：每次在给狗食物之前，先响一个铃声，然后给食物，1次、2次、10次、20次，每次铃声之后都跟着食物。狗的大脑慢慢建立起一个连结，铃声等于食物要来了。于是后来只要铃声一响，就算没有食物，狗也会开始流口水。这个现象帕夫洛夫称之为条件反射，英文叫做 classical conditioning， 也叫巴夫洛夫制约。在这个实验里面有几个重要的概念。食物是非制约刺激，意思是这个刺激天生就会引发反应，不需要学习。任何狗闻到食物都会流口水，这是本能。铃声本来是一个中性刺激，对狗来说没有任何意义。狗听到铃声不会有任何特别的反应，但是当铃声一次又一次的和食物一起出现，铃声就变成了制约刺激。它学会了预告食物的到来，于是它也能引发狗流口水的反应了。这个反应帕夫洛夫称之为制约反应。它不是天生的，是后天学习来的，是大脑在重复经验中建立起来的连结。这个发现看起来好像很简单，不就是狗学会了什么时候有东西吃吗？但是帕夫洛夫看到的比这个深得多。他说，这个实验揭示了学习的本质。所有的学习都是在建立刺激和反应之间的连结。我们之所以害怕某些东西，是因为我们的大脑把那个东西和痛苦联系在一起了。我们之所以喜欢某些东西，是因为我们的大脑把那个东西和愉快联系在一起了。这不是意志力的问题，这是神经系统的运作方式。帕夫洛夫继续深入研究条件反射的各种特性。他发现了消退效应。如果铃声一直响但不给食物，狗流口水的反应会慢慢减弱，最后消失，这叫做消退。他也发现了自发恢复。消退之后过一段时间，再次听到铃声，狗还是会流少量口水，就好像记忆没有完全消失，只是暂时被压制了。他还发现了刺激类化。如果狗学会对1000赫兹的铃声流口水，换一个频率接近的声音，狗也会有反应。刺激越接近原来的制约刺激，反应越强烈。这些发现建立了一套严谨的行为科学理论，后来被整个心理学界吸收和发展。帕夫洛夫在研究工作上有一个著名的坚持，他把每一次实验的每一个细节都记录下来。他的实验室有严格的标准作业程序，每一只实验狗都有自己的编号和健康记录。每一次实验的时间、温度、刺激强度、反应量都要精确记录。他说，科学不允许模糊，只要有一个变数没有控制好，整个实验的结论就不可靠。这种对精确性的执着让他的研究成果非常可靠。后来世界各地的科学家重复他的实验，都得到了相同的结果。帕夫洛夫的研究不只改变了科学，也深深影响了医学。他把条件反射的概念应用在神经和精神疾病的研究上。他认为许多神经症和精神疾病都可以用条件反射来解释和治疗。这个想法在当时非常超前，直到今天现代心理治疗里面的行为疗法、认知行为疗法、暴露療法都还在使用帕夫洛夫的核心概念。比如说恐惧症的治疗，一个人害怕狗，可能是因为小时候被狗咬过，那次经验让大脑把狗和恐惧连接在一起。治疗方式就是让它在安全的环境下，一点一点地接触狗，让大脑慢慢学到狗不等于危险。这就是利用了帕夫洛夫的消退原理。帕夫洛夫的一生横跨了俄罗斯历史上最动荡的时期。他出生在沙皇俄国，经历了1905年革命、1917年的布尔什维克革命、苏联的建立、斯大林的统治，这一切都发生在他的眼前。革命之后，帕夫洛夫的处境非常困难。苏维埃政府把很多学术机构关闭了，研究经费被砍掉，很多同事流亡海外。帕夫洛夫本人也考虑过离开俄罗斯，他对苏维埃政府的政策很不以为然。他公开批评列宁， 批评苏维埃对知识界的压制。但是列宁和后来的苏维埃领导人都知道，帕夫洛夫是俄国的骄傲，是世界知名的科学家，让他离开会是巨大的宣传失分。所以苏维埃政府反而给了帕夫洛夫特别的保护和支持，为他提供充足的研究经费，让他继续工作。帕夫洛夫拒绝被收买，他继续公开发表对政府的批评。在那个批评政府可能被送去古拉格的年代，这需要极大的勇气。帕夫洛夫却因为他的声望得以保全，他用科学的地位换来了说话的自由。他曾经对斯大林说过，我不管政治，我只管科学，但是当我看到科学家因为政治原因被迫害，我就必须说话，因为那伤害的是真理，而真理是科学的根基。帕夫洛夫的实验室在这段时期仍然持续运作，他训练了大批的优秀科学家，建立了苏联最重要的生理学研究中心。他的影响力穿透了政治的动荡，在科学的世界里延续下去。帕夫洛夫对中国也有特殊的影响。20世纪中期，中国开始大量引进苏联的科学思想，帕夫洛夫的条件反射理论被大力推广，中国的医学教育和心理学教育深受其影响。今天在中国任何一本心理学教科书里，都少不了帕夫洛夫的名字。帕夫洛夫对后代的影响不仅仅在科学上，他对科研态度的影响同样深远。他相信只要认真观察，诚实记录，任何人都可以发现真理。他说，自然界总是愿意揭示秘密给认真寻找的人，问题是你有没有打开眼睛去看。他也相信失败和意外是科学的老师。他说，最好的发现往往来自最不预期的地方，那些你觉得是噪音的东西，也许正是真理在敲门。帕夫洛夫活到了87岁，在那个年代是非常长寿的。他一直工作到生命的最后几个月。1936年2月27日，他因为肺炎在列宁格勒去世，也就是今天的圣彼得堡。他去世的时候据说还在口述他的观察笔记，要求助手把他的感受记录下来。一个科学家到了最后一刻还在观察，还在记录，这大概是对帕夫洛夫最好的诠释。帕夫洛夫走了，但他留下的那个简单的发现，零升加食物可以让狗流口水，却渗透进了我们所有人的日常生活。广告商用它来让你把某个品牌和快乐联系在一起，老师用它来建立学生对学习的正向连结，父母用它来培养孩子的好习惯，治疗师用它来帮助人走出创伤。就连你手机荧幕一亮你就想拿起来看，也是帕夫洛夫式的条件反射在作祟。我们以为我们是理性的生物，我们以为我们的每一个选择都是深思熟虑的结果，但帕夫洛夫告诉我们，我们的很多行为是被训练出来的，是我们的过去，我们的经历，我们重复的习惯，在我们的神经系统里刻下的痕迹。这个认识既让人有点不安，也让人充满希望。不安是因为我们发现自己没有我们想象的那么自主，希望是因为如果行为可以被训练成坏习惯，那它也可以被训练成好习惯。下次当你发现自己又下意识做了什么事情，不妨停下来问一问，这个反应是什么时候被训练进来的？是谁的铃声让我流口水？谢谢帕夫洛夫，用一只狗的唾液，让我们看见了自己。我们下次见咯。Hello everyone, I'm Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. Have you ever noticed that when your phone buzzes, you reach for it before you even think? Or when you walk into a restaurant and smell something delicious, your mouth starts watering immediately? You might think that is your own choice, but you are actually replaying an experiment that was conducted over 100 years ago. The main character in that experiment was not a human being. It was a dog. And the man who changed the world with that experiment was Ivan Pavlov. Pavlov was a Russian scientist. He won the Nobel Prize. But the discovery that made him truly legendary did not come from sophisticated equipment. It came from the saliva of a few dogs. This story begins in a small town. On September 14, 1849, Pavlov was born in Ryazan, Russia. Ryazan was a quiet city located southeast of Moscow. His father was a local Russian Orthodox priest. The family was not wealthy, but they had many books. His father encouraged the children to read and to think. From a young age, Pavlov was a boy with boundless curiosity. He loved observing plants. He loved studying insects. He was always asking why. The young Pavlov was originally expected to follow in his father's footsteps. He entered a seminary to study theology and prepared to become a priest. But then he read a book that changed everything. The book was a collection of essays by the Russian thinker Pisarev. Pisarev passionately championed the natural sciences, believing that science alone could transform Russia's future. After reading it, Pavlov was completely ignited. He decided to abandon theology and devote himself to science. In 1870, Pavlov entered St. Petersburg University to study natural sciences. There he met the mentor who would shape the rest of his life. Ilya Syin was a celebrated Russian physiologist. Under his guidance, Pavlov received rigorous scientific training. He learned precise experimental methods and systematic observation and recording. These skills would serve him for the rest of his life. Pavlov's years of study were not easy. His family was poor, and for several years he lived on a modest scholarship. Sometimes he went to the laboratory on an empty stomach. Sometimes he had no money to buy books. But he never gave up. He had a stubbornness about him. He wanted every experiment to be as precise as possible and every piece of data to be completely understood. In 1881, Pavlov married Serafima Karchevskaya, the daughter of one of his teachers. His wife was a gentle and talented woman who fully supported her husband's research. They eventually had 4 children together. Their family life was modest but filled with warmth and love. Pavlov's most important early research focused on the digestive system. He designed an innovative experimental method that allowed scientists to study the digestive process while an animal was still alive. Previously, scientists could only dissect dead animals to observe their organs. There was no way to see digestion happening in real time. Pavlov designed a surgical technique that created small openings in the stomach and intestines of dogs. Tubes were used to collect the digestive fluids that flowed out. This made it possible to study how digestive fluids were secreted while the dog lived and ate normally. This method may sound harsh to modern ears. But in that era it was a standard approach in scientific research. Pavlov was famously careful about the welfare of his research animals. He insisted that animals fully recover from surgery before any experiments continued. He believed that only a healthy animal could give reliable data. Through this meticulous digestive research, Pavlov discovered the patterns of pancreatic secretion and identified how the nervous system controls the release of gastric fluids. These findings earned him the Nobel Prize in Physiology in 1904. He was the first Russian scientist to receive a Nobel Prize. On that day all of St. Petersburg celebrated. Pavlov had become a national hero. But the discovery that would make Pavlov truly immortal was not about digestive glands. It was an accident. During the course of his digestive research, Pavlov and his team noticed something strange. The dogs would start salivating before they even saw their food. When a handler walked into the laboratory carrying the food bowl, the dogs would already begin producing saliva before the food appeared. In fact, just hearing the footsteps of the handler was enough to trigger salivation. This was a scientific puzzle. Salivation is a physiological response that should only occur when food makes contact with the mouth. How could it happen before the food even arrived? Pavlov did not ignore this. Many scientists, when confronted with unexpected results, treat them as noise or interference and filter them out to continue their original research. But Pavlov was different. He found this accidental discovery far more interesting than the problem he had originally been studying. He decided to investigate it deeply. He designed an experiment that every student now learns about. Before giving the dogs food, he rang a bell. Then he gave the food. Once, twice, 10 times, 20 times. Every time the bell was followed by food. The dog's brain slowly built an association. The bell meant food was coming. So eventually, when the bell rang, even with no food present, the dog would start salivating. Pavlov called this phenomenon a conditioned reflex. In English it is known as classical conditioning. It is also called Pavlovian conditioning. There are several key concepts in this experiment. Food is the unconditioned stimulus. This means it naturally triggers a response without any learning required. Any dog will salivate when it smells food. That is instinct. The bell was originally a neutral stimulus. It had no meaning for the dog. Hearing a bell would not produce any particular reaction. But when the bell repeatedly appeared alongside food, it became a conditioned stimulus. It learned to predict the arrival of food. so it too became capable of triggering salivation. This response Pavlov called the conditioned response. It is not innate. It is learned through experience. It is a connection built in the brain through repeated exposure. This discovery might seem simple at first. Is it not just a dog learning when it is going to be fed? But Pavlov saw something far deeper. He said this experiment revealed the very nature of learning. All learning is the formation of connections between stimuli and responses. We fear certain things because our brain has linked them to pain. We love certain things because our brain has linked them to pleasure. This is not a matter of willpower. This is how the nervous system actually works. Pavlov continued to study the various properties of conditioned reflexes. He discovered the extinction effect. If the bell kept ringing but no food was provided, the salivation response would gradually weaken and eventually disappear. This is called extinction. He also discovered spontaneous recovery. After extinction, if some time passed and the bell rang again, the dog would still produce a small amount of saliva. It was as though the memory had not fully disappeared but had only been temporarily suppressed. He further discovered stimulus generalization. If a dog had learned to salivate in response to a bell at 1000 Hz, it would also respond to a similar sound at a nearby frequency. The closer the new stimulus was to the original conditioned stimulus, the stronger the response. These findings built a rigorous theoretical framework for behavioral science. The entire field of psychology absorbed and developed his work in the decades that followed. Pavlov had one famous standard in his research: he recorded every detail of every experiment. His laboratory operated according to strict standard procedures. Every research dog had its own identification number and health record. The time of each experiment, the temperature of the room, the intensity of the stimulus, and the volume of the response all had to be precisely documented. He said that science does not allow for vagueness. If even one variable was not properly controlled, the conclusion of the entire experiment became unreliable. This insistence on precision made his findings highly credible. Scientists around the world who later repeated his experiments obtained the same results. Pavlov's research transformed not only science but also medicine. He applied the concept of conditioned reflexes to the study of neurological and psychiatric disorders. He believed that many neurotic and psychiatric conditions could be explained and treated through the framework of conditioning. This idea was far ahead of its time. Even today, modern psychotherapy approaches including behavior therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and exposure therapy all continue to use the core concepts that Pavlov established. Consider the treatment of phobias. A person who fears dogs may have been bitten as a child. That experience caused the brain to link dogs with fear. The treatment involves gradually exposing the person to dogs in a safe environment, allowing the brain to slowly learn that dogs do not equal danger. This directly applies Pavlov's extinction principle. Pavlov's life spanned one of the most turbulent periods in Russian history. He was born in Tsarist Russia and lived through the Revolution of 1905, the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, the founding of the Soviet Union, and the rule of Stalin. All of this unfolded before his eyes. After the revolution, Pavlov's circumstances became extremely difficult. The Soviet government closed many academic institutions. Research funding was cut. Many of his colleagues fled abroad. Pavlov himself considered leaving Russia. He was deeply critical of Soviet policies and publicly criticized Lenin and the Soviet suppression of intellectual life. But Lenin and subsequent Soviet leaders knew that Pavlov was Russia's pride, a world-famous scientist. Allowing him to leave would be a massive blow to national prestige. So the Soviet government actually gave Pavlov special protection and support, providing him with ample research funding to continue his work. Pavlov refused to be silenced. He continued to voice his criticism of the government publicly. In an era when criticizing the government could mean being sent to a labor camp, this required extraordinary courage. Pavlov was protected by his reputation and used his scientific standing to preserve his freedom of speech. He reportedly told Stalin directly, "I do not care about politics. I only care about science. But when I see scientists being persecuted for political reasons, I must speak out. Because that harms truth, and truth is the foundation of science." Pavlov's laboratory continued operating throughout this period. He trained generations of outstanding scientists and established the most important center of physiological research in the Soviet Union. His influence survived the political turmoil and continued to grow in the world of science. Pavlov also had a special influence on China. In the mid-20th century, China imported Soviet scientific thinking on a large scale. Pavlov's conditioned reflex theory was actively promoted and deeply influenced Chinese medical and psychological education. Today, in any psychology textbook in China, Pavlov's name is indispensable. Pavlov's influence on future generations extended beyond science. His approach to research left a lasting impression. He believed that careful observation and honest recording were enough to reveal truth to anyone willing to make the effort. He said that nature is always willing to reveal its secrets to those who seek sincerely. The question is whether you have opened your eyes to see. He also believed that failure and unexpected results were science's greatest teachers. He said that the best discoveries often come from the most unexpected places. The things you think are noise may be exactly where truth is knocking. Pavlov lived to the age of 87, an extraordinarily long life for his era. He continued working until the final months of his life. On February 27, 1936, he died of pneumonia in Leningrad, which is the city known today as St. Petersburg. It is said that in his final moments he was still dictating his observations to an assistant, asking that his experiences be recorded. A scientist observing and documenting until the very last breath. That is perhaps the truest portrait of Ivan Pavlov. Pavlov is gone. But the simple discovery he left behind, that a bell paired with food can make a dog salivate, has seeped into every corner of our daily lives. Advertisers use it to make you associate a brand with happiness. Teachers use it to build positive connections between students and learning. Parents use it to help children develop good habits. Therapists use it to help people recover from trauma. And even that instinct to pick up your phone the moment the screen lights up, that too is Pavlovian conditioning at work. We like to think of ourselves as rational beings. We like to believe that every choice we make is the result of careful deliberation. But Pavlov showed us that many of our behaviors were trained into us. They are the traces left in our nervous systems by our past experiences, our repeated habits, and the patterns we have lived through. This realization is both a little unsettling and deeply hopeful. Unsettling, because we discover that we are not as autonomous as we imagined. Hopeful, because if behavior can be trained into bad habits, it can also be trained into good ones. The next time you catch yourself doing something automatically, without thinking, try pausing and asking, when was this response trained into me? Whose bell is making me salivate? Thank you, Pavlov, for using the saliva of a dog to help us see ourselves more clearly. See you next time.